si el Congreso no eleva el techo de la deuda.
Los datos del Departamento del Tesoro de Estados Unidos muestran que la deuda pública total del país alcanzó este lunes los 31,1 billones de dólares.
La deuda está a punto de aplastar a Estados Unidos. La economía estadounidense se ha visto envuelta en una de las deudas más grandes de toda su historia, y no sabe cómo podrá salir de ella. Esa es una verdad que se hace cada vez más difícil ocultar. Medios como la BBC, la CNN, el New York Times y The Hills anunciaron que el gobierno alcanzó el límite de su deuda a comienzos de este mismo año. Eso es algo gravísimo, porque hay más de 60 millones de hispanos viviendo en Estados Unidos, y muy pronto pasarán a ser una mayoría, pero habrán llegado demasiado tarde a tratar de disfrutar de la prosperidad estadounidense.
La deuda no debe usarse como un juego político, declaró la vocera de la Casa Blanca.
Este techo se elevó a finales del año pasado después de que el Congreso de Estados Unidos aprobara una nueva legislación con el fin de evitar el inminente incumplimiento de la deuda del país.
Son números enormes y no podemos seguir simplemente aumentando ese límite de la tarjeta de crédito del gobierno federal.
El país no será el mismo país próspero que el mundo conoce. Las ayudas del Seguro Social, el desempleo, la salud médica gratuita para la gente pobre, podría desaparecer muy pronto por lo que está sucediendo, y es cuestión de alarmarse grandemente.
Let's talk about the banking collapse. What in the world is going on with the banks right now? And we, I think, are about to have a repeat of the 2008 financial collapse in a couple of different ways. But it's going to look a lot different, though, this time. Because this morning, we'll get into some of the details of how it's going to look different. But it is starting to shape up this way, and it's very, very troubling. Fresh signs, though, that the banking collapse is sweeping across the globe, about to hit Europe as well. Of course, this morning, all of the concern in Europe. That's why the stock market today was down 500 points this morning, but it was up 300 points yesterday. We'll get into why that is, but Credit Suisse, of course, a European bank, big concerns that it could sweep across Europe. So I got a question for you, though. Why does the stock market go up 300 points yesterday when the U.S. banks are collapsing? All around, it goes up, and then when it goes down 500 points when there's fears of the European banking sector collapsing. Can anybody answer that in the chat? Be curious. We'll kind of maybe come back to you guys. Put in your thoughts here. What do you think? What do you think?
Because the stock market is a perversion.
Yes, it is perverted. The stock market is a perversion. It is perverted. It's artificial. And it's artificially propped up by fake U.S. dollars, right? And so Europe, though, different scenario. And so as the United States is trying to prop up the U.S. economy right now, trying to prop up all of these U.S. banks, Europe is basically saying, and Saudi Arabian investors inside of Credit Suisse were like, no, they don't need help. They're gonna crash on their own. So like what the United States is doing is like bailing out these people who made risky investments and made stupid moves, and Europe right now is like, let them wallow in their own filth, perhaps. We'll see how it shapes out.
Yeah.
But so that's maybe perhaps part of it. We can get into more of this. So we'll try to make our way through this mess. Yesterday, Moody's, though, the ratings agency, downgraded the entire banking system. Watch this announcement.
Moody's cuts outlook on U.S. banking system to negative, not on individual banks, on the system, citing, and this is a quote, rapidly deteriorating operating environment. Rapidly deteriorating operating environment. That is an understatement, but undoubtedly true.
Yeah, and so on Friday, of course, when this was hitting Silicon Valley Bank, economists who know this very well were saying this is not just going to be isolated. They're all interconnected. and this is going to spread rapidly. And then it did to Signature Bank. And it's spreading to other banks. And now it's spreading to European banks. Here's how CNN covered. I love the way that they just kind of downplayed this. They're like, it's kind of a big deal, but this is CNN. Watch.
How should we be interpreting Moody's decision now to downgrade the entire banking sector?
Well, it's certainly a sign of continued concern about these banks. Moody's says that they expect that banks are going to continue to remain under pressure for as long as the Federal Reserve hikes interest rates. They're warning they could downgrade 6 U.S. banks, including First Republic Bank, Western Alliance, and Comerica.
So those are the other banks now on that list.
But given that we're corporate backed, we're not going to ask you to panic about it.
Yeah, don't panic. CNBC not panicking. Like, it's amazing to watch CNBC I can't believe these guys are still on the air. Like, literally a few weeks ago, Jim Cramer was telling his audience, yeah, there's nothing wrong with Silicon Valley Bank. Go invest in them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a big, like, kind of mocking Reddit thing where like anything Jim Cramer says, you short it. You short what he tells you to buy.
Yeah, you would have been rich.
And yet Wall Street skyrocketed yesterday. 300 points. The Dow Jones up 300 points. The system is rigged for the wealthy. The few who run the show, I mean, look no further than the small regional banks that we covered here yesterday on the show, which are folding up and seeing massive withdrawals. So all these little banks in these little towns drying up, collapsing, and the big banks, where's the money flowing? It's flowing right to the big banks. We knew this was going to happen, and we covered this yesterday, and now we know. Over the past 48 hours, Bank of America, get this, saw record deposits. Record deposits.
From where?
Small banks. People taking their money out of the small banks and putting them into the really big banks, the hegemonic banks, the ones that are totally propped up and in partnership with the Biden administration, the federal government. Look at this. Basically, 15 billion new deposits, new accounts set up. Bank of America has raked in 15 billion new deposits after the SVB collapse. Go ahead, David.
Well, and they put out these graphics that show all of the negative percentages of all these small banks. And then you see the ones that are still in the green, the Bank of America, the big banks, and you're like, oh, I guess I better put my money there because they're in the green. So it's by design that they do that.
It doesn't change the amount that your account is insured for. The FDIC insurance is still $250,000. So it does not necessarily make you safer. It just makes you feel like you're in a more crowded place.
Well, you know what's funny about the FDIC thing you bring up is that it's now $250,000 that you're protected, right? "Quote unquote" protected. But now it's infinite, because what the Biden administration just did was basically say 250,000 that's not a real number anymore. Now they're bailing out all of these people that had much bigger deposits.
Yeah.
So it is no longer $250,000.
In fact, by some reports, the Meghan Markles of the world had their accounts there.
Yeah, Gavin Newsom had his account with Silicon Valley Bank.
I think she probably had more than 250,000.
And so did Gavin Newsom, and so did these other people.
Yeah.
So Gavin Newsom was out there championing this bailout because he didn't disclose to his audiences and his voters that he actually is a big customer of Silicon Valley Bank. So yeah, these guys, $250,000 is no longer the threshold. And by the way, that was increased after the 2008 collapse. It was $100,000.
Oh.
So now it's up to $250,000. But now it's infinite. So these are artificial fake numbers. Of course, and you know, people are laid off. Facebook laying off 10,000 people. All of these tech companies laying...
Tyson Chicken today laying off 1,500, I think, was the number.
You can't keep track of all of them. Let us know in the chat, like if you know of other companies are laying people off right now. So what's happening again, it's like lockdown 2.0, 2008 in a different light. We're seeing the same thing. A collapse of the banking system that is now being propped up by the Biden administration, not letting it to collapse. What they should have done in the United States is allow Silicon Valley Bank to collapse. Like, I'm sorry. You make risky investments. You bet big on these things, and they should be allowed to have their natural course of things and die off, right? And then you don't prop them up.
But
Well, I was going to say, at the core, they're already propped up anyway, because the whole system is a sham, because it's not even real money. And they have all these rules. They can do fractional banking, and for every dollar they can loan out 10. It's like that whole system from the core is flawed. And how can you not do what they're doing in that environment?
Right. I mean, the big criticism of 2008 was that they never allowed it to actually collapse.
Yes.
Right? It never allowed it to get it out of its system.
That ran on their major platform was that they wanted to count the gold in Fort Knox. Truman got into office, in January, completed the audit by April and said, we did it. We think there's this much. They released a press release and that was it. According to the press release, most of the auditors never even touched the gold. They touched about 10% of it and made an estimate. And the people who had done those audits were not even experts in that. And they considered it a done deal with just one press release, even though that was his major campaign promise, was to actually get in and see it all. And there was some power that did not want that to happen. And sort of the mainstream press dropped it because Truman dropped it.
Yeah.
Well, and recently we had the whole thing with Germany, or one of those countries, wanting their gold that we're supposed to have in reserve. And it's like, well, we don't have it. So, and then that story just disappeared. Like we talked about it and then it was.
Yeah.
Americans were outlawed from owning gold. And a lot of Europeans got wealthy by buying it up in the United States because of that.
But that's going to be the advantage for those other countries because they still hold gold. They still have, they have gold currency.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and the closest gold-backed big currency in the world is the Russian ruble. Not technically tied to the gold standard, it is as close as any other currency is in the world is the Russian ruble to a gold.
Wall Street turned their attention to the head of JP Morgan, who of course is Jamie Dimon. They went to his office, they held signs outside for 24 hours a day, and they hassled other bank presidents too. And before long, a funny thing happened. Everybody in the media decided that Occupy Wall Street was boring. Anything about economics was boring, because who cares about carried interest? What's that? What we really want to talk about, they told you, is racial oppression and your role in it. And so we got a lot of that, only for like 12 years now. An endless parade of lies about this or that, your complicity in systemic racism, police shootings. They're everywhere. Everyone's getting killed by the cops. Hands up, don't shoot. Remember that? So we're all still talking about that nonsense, ripping the country apart along racial lines. But guess what we're not talking about? Oh, banks. And guess who loves that? Banks. They deeply appreciate that. And maybe that's why, as BLM rioters torch major cities, Democrats who took big money from big banks knelt in reverence to BLM.
We are here to honor George Floyd. In a moment, we will have a moment of silence, actually 8 minutes and 46 seconds of silence in honor of George Floyd and so many others who lost their lives or were abused by police brutality. For those who wish to, we will now kneel for our moment of silence.
Oh, so great. What does everybody in that frame have in common? Well, they'll have kente cloth robes on. A lot of them are wearing masks. No, but they're all bank shills. That's what it is. They're all bank shills. They're shills for finance. Of course, every single one of them, and particularly the utterly soulless Nancy Pelosi. She'll say anything on behalf of the banks. And the banks love this, of course. They want to make sure it continued. And that's why, according to amazing new analysis from the Claremont Institute, Silicon Valley Bank, brace yourself, spent more than $73 million on donations to BLM and related organizations. Wow! And this is not personal funds. Apparently, these are bank funds. Might be kind of nice to have that money now, but it's hard to argue, even in retrospect, now that SVB has failed, that that was a bad investment. Because even now, as banks are collapsing, no one in media is anxious to criticize banks, almost no matter what they do. It doesn't matter what they do. Even if they were to, just pulling this out of thin air, openly profiteer from a war in Eastern Europe that's killing hundreds of thousands of people. Oh, it turns out they are. And we know that because Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and a very close friend of banks and BlackRock, is bragging about it. Watch.
It is obvious that American business can become the locomotive that will once again push forward global economic growth. We have already managed to attract attention and have cooperation with such giants of the international financial and investment world as BlackRock, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs.
So we're getting moral lectures from the banks and we're getting a lecture on capitalism from some Ukrainian oligarch in a sweatshirt. Okay, now.